WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast. The definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is another example, and there's Linkwood and Glendullan, Macando, Mortimer, Clynelish.
Dr. Jim Beveridge is a quiet man, even though he's the master blender for one of the world's best-known Scotch whiskey brands, and probably could spend months on the road each year promoting Johnnie Walker if he wanted to. He prefers to be with his team at Diageo's blending lab in Menstrie, Scotland. When we sat down to talk at the Explorers Club in New York City, it was one of the few times he's ever come to the U.S. for work, after 36 years of making whiskeys.
What brings you joy as a blender?
I really enjoy working with whiskies. I love the flavours. I'm also a scientist at heart, so I love exploring the origin of flavours and how I can use that knowledge to gain insights to allow me to make great whiskies. So that's what gives me joy. And I'm also very lucky. I'm a member of I've got 12 blenders, and it's a great team to work in. So it's a real joy to work with all the skilled people in my team.
Give me an example of the last time you really felt joy when you came up with that magic blend. What was it like, and what was the blend?
Well, we've just recently launched a new blend, the Johnnie Walker Select Casks blend, rye cask finish, and we had great fun creating that blend. We enjoyed making it. We enjoyed thinking about how we would make it, the challenge, obviously. But I think what's brought me particular joy was watching everyone enjoying it last night. There's a lot of people saying to me just how much they like the blend, and that obviously brings me a lot of joy.
That was the first time you'd really done anything with a rye whiskey cask, wasn't it? Well,
it's something, for Johnnie Walker, this is a different kind of flavour for Johnnie Walker, that very sweet vanilla with the kind of peppery notes that you expect to find in rye whiskies. So it's a Scotch whisky take on rye whiskey. And so it was a different style of whiskey, quite different for Johnnie Walker, and quite a challenge for us to do, but I'm looking forward to see how it's received.
Tell me how you got your start in blending years ago.
I've worked for Johnnie Walker for 36 years. I started as a chemist, looking at the flavours in Scotch whisky. That was my brief. I was very, very lucky. I was given the freedom to spend lots of time in our distilleries, in our warehouses, and at the blender's table, if you like, looking at flavours and connecting that with the chemistry of the components of whisky. So that's where I started from. It's given me some great insights into my understanding of flavour, and it's something I can use now as a blender.
I know you've mentored a lot of young blenders over the years. Who was your mentor? Tell me about him.
Well, my mentor was really a collective of many very talented scientists. Johnnie Walker invested a lot in the science and technology of whisky, and I was very lucky to be part of that community, and I learned a lot from them, and they showed me all the various aspects of blending and the science of flavours. And in an odd sort of way, all the time we had the great blenders looking over our shoulders, because we worked for Johnnie Walker, and the kind of styles of whisky which we've inherited, they're certainly the aspects of flavour that we value most.
Tell me about some of those folks, though. The people that you worked under.
Well,
and let's name some names here. Give some credit to these folks.
Well, I think these are names that not many people will know. Obviously, one of the big names for me was a guy called Dr. Bob Duncan, and he started a particular friend, or a particular colleague was a guy called Dr. Bob Duncan. And he actually developed the whole science and technology of gas chromatography, which was a technique of analysis which was in its infancy at the time he was operating as a scientist. And some of the very first instruments were actually developed under him. And that's a technology which is now very commonly used across all aspects of science. But that was something very new, and he pioneered that work. and then started applying it to the flavour of Scotch whisky. And that, I think, was the beginning of the kind of understanding of Scotch flavour that we have now, was with the development of that technique.
What do we know about flavors now that we didn't know 36 years ago when you got started? What have you learned about the science of flavors over your career?
I think my understanding of the science of flavours is that the senses of nose and taste that we have as individuals is incredibly sophisticated and so well developed. The pursuit of science is to try and understand that and rationalise that. We've got a certain way with it, with some of the aspects of that ability that we have as human beings to understand flavours. The science has taken us along that route to a degree. Some of it has helped enormously, but there's still many aspects that remain a secret. The science and technology, I think, has used us mostly in understanding our processes. So how to manage distillation, how to manage our casks. The science and technology has helped us enormously in all of that. So it's a huge enabler, but there still remains lots of mysteries to be discovered. So that's the context in which we're blending. Very much thinking about the history and heritage behind it.
Jim Beveridge's background is in analytical chemistry, and he helped develop the flavor map and language used by whiskey blenders and tasters worldwide. But he admits there's just as much art in whiskey blending as there is science, and perhaps even some luck to boot.
Like many crafts, I think an understanding of flavours in Scotch whisky comes from an understanding of the science and technology that lies behind it. It's a huge enabler, and it gives us great insights. And so you need to have all that knowledge at your fingertips. But then I think with that knowledge, you start to then use that knowledge to create great blends. And I think there's a kind of transition between the hard science and technology into what really I think becomes more like an art. So I think it's, with all experts, I think that transition takes place. The skills, those latent skills are at everyone's fingertips. And then that somehow then is converted into something that's quite creative and quite intuitive. And that I think is the transition between science and art. So that I think happens a lot in the creation of great blends. Do we get lucky? Yes, we do. There's no doubt about that. There are some combinations of liquids that are just totally unpredictable, and when they occur, you're just grateful for it, and you know to use that combination. But predicting it would be very difficult.
Give me an example of one of those occasions when you combined two different whiskies and got something really special.
I think one that stands out for me is Johnnie Walker Double Black. The brief for Johnnie Walker Double Black was to create a blend which was similar, clearly had the same DNA as Johnnie Walker Black Label, but was slightly different. And I felt the best way to do that would be to give it an extra smoky dimension. And the challenge for me was to create a blend which had that smoky dimension and would remind those who knew what to look for, would remind them of the Islay whiskies, the island whiskies. But that was quite a challenge to get that unique characteristic, but at the same time have a blend that was discernibly of the same style as Johnnie Walker Black Label. And I still remember we were working in the laboratory with a colleague, Kirsty and myself were working together, and suddenly we just got the right combination, and we just knew that was going to be Johnnie Walker Double Black. There was no nonsense around it. We just simply had a combination that worked, and it met all the criteria that I wanted to achieve. And we just said, right, let's just walk away. We've done it, and that was a great day.
And that is arguably the smokiest whiskey you've come up with, right? Or is there a smokier blend that you've come up with under the Johnnie Walker brand?
I think it's the Johnnie Walker blend that has the most discernible island whiskey flavours in it, and that really was what I wanted to do with Johnnie Walker Black, Double Black.
Do you have a favourite blending malt?
I think all of our malts are really special. If you were to pin me down to say which would be my favourites, I think my favourites would be Talisker and Clynelish. These would be the two that I think that stand out to me most of all.
I know other distillers and blenders have said they love Mortlock for the beefiness it offers a blend. What does that do for your blends? What does that do for your nose as well?
I think Mortlach is a very unique whisky. Amazing asset to have in our inventory. I'm very fortunate to have that distillery, and it's a great asset to have in terms of the flavours it can bring to a blend. It adds depth and complexity. That's the big role that Mortlach plays.
How much of your work is driven by the marketing folks telling you what they'd like you to create, and you and your team creating something special and taking it to marketing and say, find a place for this. This needs to be in our portfolio?
I think all successful blends start with our consumers. That's been the experience throughout my whole career, that the best blends are the ones that start with thinking about consumer insight. So the message comes from the market, and then we work a blend around that message. And we can certainly work with the market and try and shape the idea, but it has to come from our consumers first of all. There's a number of examples of what were considered to be great blends that then looked for a consumer, and very few of them have actually been successful.
What do you want to be remembered for most 50 years from now? When they tell the story of Dr. Jim Beveridge, what do you want to be remembered?
I think my legacy sits within the members of the blending team. So I think if I did want to be remembered in any way, it would be remembered through the skills of the team. That I think would be the greatest achievement. Have
you identified your successor yet?
I think whoever my successor would be, my ambition for the team is that everyone in the team develops and becomes, in a way, a uniquely skilled individual who's a part of a team, and that collectively that team has some amazing skills and some amazing synergies. As to who will be the ultimate successor for me, that's not really going to be my decision. My role just now is to make sure that within the team there is the capability to find a successor, and I'm sure that will happen.
And I hope that doesn't happen for a long time to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
For more Cask-Strength conversation on whiskeys, with the people who make them and the people who drink them, join us each week for WhiskyCast. In New York City, I'm Mark Gillespie.